YouTube audience, thanks for joining me once again. This is the AK, Mr. 530, better known as the Atheist Killer. So, today we're going to talk about a soul, and this is going to be a response video to another video that I've seen on YouTube. So, first let me begin by asking, what is a soul? There are many Bible verses that talk about the human soul, such as Matthew 22:37, which says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind." There is clearly a distinction between all three, and that all three do exist. Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a soul as the immaterial essence, animating principle, or actuating cause of an individual life. The spiritual principle embodied in human beings, all rational and spiritual beings, or the universe. The moral and emotional nature of human beings, the quality that arouses emotion or sentiment, spiritual or moral force, etc. It then goes into further detail when it explains the human soul is an immaterial aspect or essence of a person, conjoined with the body during life and separable at death. The concept of a soul is found in nearly all cultures and religions, though the interpretations of its nature vary considerably. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into why it is that I'm actually making this video. So, there's this guy on YouTube named NOELPLUM99 that made a video titled, "I know, I know you haven't got a soul." The video is very poorly done, and you can tell that the author of the video had not thought out his argument very well. Either that or his basic attempts at logic and reasoning are not very sound. I noticed that this particular video of his had been up for almost 3 years, so I decided it was time to dismantle and destroy it and give people what they want, the atheist killer's refutation. So let's get right into this. My first point number 1, Mr. NOELPLUM99. I do not have to accept, nor am I required to accept, an evolutionary process. So the author's entire argument falls flat. I believe that humans were created by God in their current form with a soul, and were not a product of billions of years of evolutionary theory or process. Therefore, would not be required to believe that all life forms possess a soul like humans. This includes plants, trees, grass, mosquitoes, ants, snails, or any other living thing. Because of this, I would also not need to believe the evolutionary process brought us all the way up to the point of the great apes, and then God simply had to interject a soul when humans were developed. His assertion here is a strawman fallacy of the Christian position. Point number 2. God, by definition, is an all-knowing and all-powerful personal mind. Giving people souls is not a problem nor a hard task. The question becomes, when exactly does this ensoulment process take place? Well, of course, no one knows for sure, because a soul by definition is immaterial and cannot be directly tested for. The author of the video claims that if it happens directly at the moment of conception, then serious issues arise, such as God having to recycle souls and sinful conceptuses going to hell. The author points out that 2/3 of conceptuses never implant in the uterus. He quotes one study where 20% of human conceptuses recovered 4.5 days after insemination of failed pregnancies were abnormal. My response? Well, first of all, we need to remember that because God is an all-powerful and all-knowing personal mind, He knows ahead of time which egg and which sperm combination will become actualized and make it to these certain points of the developmental process, such as successful implantation into the uterus. Of course, it seems obvious to me that God would not hand out souls to conceptuses that He knows will never implant into the uterus or make it to these critical junctures. Therefore, souls would not be recycled, as the author claims. Also, there may be some other critical point in the developmental process which God has deemed the exact moment for ensoulment. For example, it could be 10 days after conception, or 7 days after conception, or when the brain is formed, or when the heart is formed, or when the initial chemical reactions occur in the brain, or when the new genome takes over control of the egg, etc. No one knows for sure, but we do know that God is perfect in every sense, and this is part of the definition of God, and His application of souls at the correct time or the correct moment would be no different. It's important to note that God would not need to sit back waiting to see which embryos or conceptuses make it to this critical juncture and which ones do not. Why? Because He already knows everything that's going to happen before it happens. But also, He would have that person's soul already planned for, as everyone's life is ultimately planned by God. The point here is that God knows which conceptuses will become an embryo. He knows which embryo will ultimately become a fetus. He knows which fetus will become actualized and be born. He knows everything. This is part of the definition of God and being all-knowing. To address the author's initial question of when does the ensoulment process actually take place, well, of course, no one really knows, but it's my personal opinion that the embryos which God has planned for to become actualized will be given their soul sometime between implantation into the uterus and the first brain activity, first heartbeat, first chemical reaction, or some other critical juncture. But also, let me remind you, since God knows which conceptuses will make it and which ones won't, it could also be claimed that the conceptuses which God has planned for to make it could be given their soul exactly when the sperm first meets the egg without issue. And the other sperm and egg combination which God did not plan for to make it will never get to the fetus or embryo stage, and they will not be given a soul at that exact same moment or ever, since God knew that they were not planned for. For example, if I draft 2 quarterbacks in the NFL draft, and I know ahead of time which one will get me to the Super Bowl and which one will not make the team, technically, I could give that winning quarterback a huge contract the very first day he walks into the facility, and not pay the other quarterback a single dime because I know he was going to get cut in the first couple days. It's also important to note that any fetuses that are in the womb after the ensoulment process would, in my opinion, be brought to heaven. So the author's depiction of failed conceptuses going to hell is pathetic and not very well thought out. Any embryos or conceptuses which had not reached this critical juncture, or conceptuses which never implanted into the uterus and had not been planned for by God to become actualized, would not have been given a soul or a brain or a heartbeat or the chemical reaction or make it to the point where the ensoulment process occurred, therefore would not be in heaven or hell. So what is the exact moment again? We may never know. But not knowing when is not evidence that a soul does not and cannot exist. This brings us to point number 3, as far as twins are concerned. It's obvious to theists that God gives each twin their own independent soul. This is a redundant issue because, again, we do not know exactly when that specific moment is, but that is not evidence that a soul does not or cannot exist. God knows ahead of time that he planned to create twins, and if it's twins he wants, then twins he will get. The same point applies as before. It's possible that God doesn't hand out a soul until the first chemical reaction in the brain or some other distinct point chosen by God in the developmental process. But again, it could just be that God only gives the conceptuses that he knows will become actualized a soul, and he gives them that soul at the very first moment the sperm touches the egg, long before they get to any critical moment, because there would not need to be a critical moment, since he knew the conceptuses that would not make it would never be given a soul, and he would not hand one out to them at the point where the egg sperm connect. An example that I feel is applicable here is when you have conjoined twins that would share all the same organs and body parts, but are able to have 2 separate thought processes. Clearly, God would have given them both their own soul at some point in the developmental stage, because he would have known both twins, even though conjoined, would still become actualized independently. However, if God hadn't planned for one of them to reach the certain stage in the developmental process, then no soul would be given to that particular twin. This will be evident when we see something like a child with another body growing out of the side of him with fully formed body or limbs. That child, which never became actualized without the brain, was never dealt a soul. God had planned for one child, and that one living child has a soul. The devil is the reason that we have abnormalities and pain and suffering and disease. This is a fallen world that we live in, and people have to remember that. So, this brings us to point number 4. The author asks, how can our immaterial soul interact with our material brains? Or rather, how can the immaterial control the material? This is a classic argument from ignorance, as no one in fact believes that the soul controls or instructs the brain. They actually work together. Your brain is in fact the naturalistic way your soul, which is supernatural, expresses itself. Your soul doesn't control your thought process, but rather your soul, which is supernatural, is expressed in a natural way while you're here on earth. These are chemical processes that occur in your brain and allow you to think, have thought process, move your body parts, feel pain, experience happiness, etc. Our souls and brains work together while we are these material beings and live in this naturalistic state. God designed us to be natural beings. A soul without a brain would not be able to express itself in a naturalistic way. Souls are the immaterial things which need a naturalistic home or shell while we are living in this naturalistic world. That shell or home is the body and the brain. The brain and body and soul work together and make you a complete being while you're living in this natural world. When your brain dies, your soul will no longer need the brain and body combination, nor the naturalistic world in which we live, and will pass on to the supernatural world. However, even if I was wrong about all of this, there are plenty of other resolutions. For example, I could easily make the claim that one's soul sits idle inside of a person doing nothing, and then at the end of a person's life, their soul becomes the combination or sum of all of that person's thoughts, life, activity, experiences, and soaks them all up into one single entity, which is the soul, and then that soul supernaturally manifests itself, or manifests all these things, and it's off to the supernatural realm, while your brain and body are left behind in the natural world to die. So, there are many ways to get around these apparent issues that this author proposes. Again, none of which are evidence that souls do not and cannot exist. Next, point number 5. The author likes to talk about conservation of energy, another straw man and argument from ignorance, which is not worth delving into. The easy answer here is that our soul is not energy. One's soul is supernatural and not affected by any naturalistic process such as conservation of energy, gravity, the second law of thermodynamics, etc. So his argument here does not even apply. Your soul is not even affected by your own death, as we believe it's supernatural and goes on even after your naturalistic body dies. And finally, this brings us to point number 6. The author of the video, NOELPLUM99, likes to talk about blows to the head or injuries that would cause personality change, etc. Again, it's important to remember that the devil is the one running around causing this pain and suffering and all the death in the world. I've always wondered about this issue, and actually the question that he asks is a question that I've asked many times. I would like to also myself ask some prominent thinkers, philosophers, and other theologians this question. But just for the sake of this rebuttal and to address this apparent issue, you can resort back to my previous statements. One soul could simply be waiting by, idle until death, at which point the sum of all you are is supernaturally absorbed into the soul, and into the supernatural realm it goes. God could easily have made it so any injuries, people that become brain dead or have drastic personality changes due to injury, which one could not control, are not held accountable and are not part of your soul when your soul absorbs and the true you ascends into heaven and are judged. It's just food for thought. But again, this is a great question and one I will research further, but it's not in any way evidence that a soul does not or cannot exist, and the question can easily be overcome. So the title of NOELPLUM99's video is, I know that you haven't got a soul. But really, sir, you don't know if I have a soul or not, as a soul is a supernatural thing which cannot be tested for or proven invalid. It's immaterial. Every attempt at disproving the existence of one's soul has fallen flat throughout the centuries, and he should honestly go take some college courses in philosophy, because his understanding of philosophy is terrible and his logic in his video is quite disgusting. If the existence of one's soul could be proven illogical, you would see atheistic theologians and philosophers trying to drill people like William Lane Craig and others with it. But you don't, because there is no argument here. Souls are real, and mine will be in heaven. Where will yours be? That remains to be seen. I hope you enjoyed this video. I know it got kind of long, but I've been waiting a little bit of time before I wanted to make it, and so here it is. I'm the Atheist Killer, the AK, better known as Mr. 530. If you have any more questions, feel free to inbox me or hit me up on COL or Blue House Apologetic Society, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Look out for my new videos that are on the way. See you soon, and we're out of here. God bless.